Hey everybody, Greg here from the Player Engage podcast. Today we have a really cool episode and I want to let you know what you're about to listen to. Today we are sitting down with Ryan Burnett. He is the studio director at Respawn Madison. We talk about a whole bunch of cool different things that a studio director will do, including building a studio from the ground up in Madison, which is an awesome conversation we have and how you go about doing that. The Midwest itself as a gaming development hub and the growth of the number of studios, preventing burnout and managing LiveOps, the role of player feedback, and leadership and culture when you're running a studio as well as in game development. It's a really cool and fun podcast. It is the third episode of our MDev series, which is coming at you in about a week and a half. And it's good stuff, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Player Engage podcast. Greg here. Today, we're thrilled to have Ryan Burnett with us. Ryan is a studio director at Respawn Madison, where he's at the helm of development of Apex Legends. With over 17 years in the gaming industry, Ryan has a deep background in project management, creative execution, and leading high-caliber teams. From guiding the Unreal Engine 5 project at Epic to expanding Respawn's Madison studio into a thriving development hub, Ryan's passion for development and creating unforgettable player experiences shines through in everything he does. Let's jump in and learn more about Ryan. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. Anything I missed about yourself?
No, thank you for having me here. I'm super excited to talk about gaming. I love talking shop, so I'm super excited for this.
Yeah, me too. And I'm really excited to talk to you on multiple fronts because you've basically built a studio in Madison. And I think that's so awesome, so epic. And I just think to myself, how does that begin? And we have a lot of things I can talk to you about, but let's just kind of start with this big question. Is just how do you actually start building a studio? Like, well, what's your goal when you kind of get this okay to kind of build this out? You're the third Respawn studio, I believe, that's out there. Like, how do you go about this journey?
Yeah, what's interesting about starting a studio is there's no book. There's no guide to it, right? So you kind of, just to be frank, you really make it up as you go, right? It's one of those things where when I got the call to think about this and start thinking about what it takes and all that sort of stuff, the first thing I went to was like, okay, who's my core group that I want to bring with me, right? I use that kind of euphemism of okay, who's coming on the lifeboat with me, right? So as soon as this started to become reality, I started calling sort of some of my closest friends and colleagues that I've worked with in the past that I felt could really help me build this. I thought it was really important to really start with the leadership. Can you build that foundation that is going to be of like mind, help build a culture, help build a process? Because it's one of those things, you can't do this on your own, and you have to surround yourself by really, really strong people. And I think that was key to kind of getting us off the ground.
I love the idea, and we've heard about it a few times, is surround yourself with people who are good leaders, good talent, people who know more than you in different aspects of it. And I like that you're kind of using that network. Was Madison always the landing ground for this studio? Was that kind of the thought that Respawn was thinking when going this route?
It was, it was a little serendipitous. I was born and raised in Wisconsin. It's something where I've worked out of Madison, and I've worked on the biggest titles in the world out of Madison. And it's one of those things where when I got the phone call, it was really, we talked a lot about how Madison is a development hub. It's not a massive development hub like Seattle or Vancouver or Los Angeles, but there is talent around here. Call of Duty is literally out my back door here over at Raven Software. PUBG is downtown. So there's a lot of development talent and studios around here. So we felt really confident we could bring in folks and we could bring talent in at a cost-effective level. So it's one of those things where I remember I was talking to Ben Cavallo, and this might be the only place in the world where Call of Duty, Fortnite, PUBG, and Apex Legends are all developed within a 15-mile radius, right? So that if you just think about that's really incredible, if you ask me.
I think who would have guessed that like the Midwest is first person shooter central where all this stuff is going on. I just imagine there's like, instead of game night at the bar, you guys all bring a copy of your game and like you take turns saying, hey, we're gonna have a battle royale here, we're gonna play PUBG one night, we're gonna play Apex one night, and just go through all of them. I know Ben is working on building this community out, but was there a community when you started building this, or do you see with Ben's work to kind of unite everyone that is a growing community?
Yeah, I think it's a growing community. I think the community has been around for a while. And I think what Ben has done really well in what we're trying to do with MDev and what I try and do all the time is it really build the awareness of it. I think the awareness in the game industry is relatively small, that the Midwest is a development hub, and it's a viable option to build talent around and build studios and build product. So really, I think what both of our missions are, it's just really build awareness and shine a spotlight on this thriving, growing community.
What are some of the challenges with the Midwest, right? Is it, I know that you have a good abundance of talent there, right? And I've spoken to a couple of other studios that say there's a lot of talent in the area, but what type of challenges do you face as being kind of landlocked in the middle of the country?
Yeah, I think the challenges are, there's a good amount of talent here. There's not enough talent to build a really large studio or a large development at this point. So we do have to recruit people to the Midwest. So it's a lot of selling people on the Midwest, and on Wisconsin specifically. So when we do recruiting, it does take a bit longer. The pool of talent to pull from is not as large as, again, I'll compare it to Los Angeles. So you do have to be more patient, and you have to find the right talent that's willing to move. And when you move here, it's a life change. It's a life change for a lot of people. So what we find is we look for people who have Midwest roots. So people who have gone to university here or have grown up around here and then moved out west and have done that. What we find often are people, okay, I've done the Los Angeles thing. I'm growing up, I'm getting older, I'm doing all the like the mature things of like setting down roots and getting a family and thinking about school systems and all those things that you have to start doing as an adult. Those are things that like we find that that's a very, very common story. Or it's a story where cost of living, people want to have a house in a yard, and stuff like that. And that's something that you can do in the Midwest if you work in games, where you necessarily can't do in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Seattle.
Something I find fascinating, and you're talking through it right now without really me teeing you up, is that you're the fifth person I'm talking to really from the Midwest about studios, games in general, and everyone mentions family values. And I was talking to my marketing team yesterday. I'm just like, it sounds weird that I have to keep saying this, but like, I feel like most places have family values, but when I'm talking to the people from the Midwest, like, it's very apparent. And they said, no, they don't actually think family values is top of mind when you go most places in the world. But talking to you, I talked to Josh from Pyramid Lake Games. I talked to Patrick from Alchemy Lab. Like everyone's helping their kids learn. Everyone has family involved. And I love that. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I love including them in this. And hearing people talk about this is just so exciting to me because, you know, this is the future of gaming and we are helping enable the future of gaming. And you guys have that value. And I don't even know how to ask a question here. It's just so cool to hear this because it's apparent.
Yeah, something that I think is really important to me as we've been building this studio, and this is kind of one of those really soft things, but like as we've been building the studio, I want people's families to come to the studio. I want my kids come here all the time, and they see the games and they get excited about it. And I think what that does is that helps build a culture. It builds a culture like I'm not a fan of saying the workplace is a family, but I am a fan of like building close bonds and relationships, right? And understanding that we are more than game developers. We are people. We're fathers. We're mothers, and all that sort of stuff. So I do think there is some value in having that kind of that aspect, if you will, and just considering that like we're in a world right now where you blend your personal life and your work life is very common. Where 2 decades ago that wasn't as common, but generations have changed, and we work all the time right now. You work off your phone. You work different hours, all those sorts of things. So I think it's important that you really have a good blend of your personal values with your work values.
And I've read that you've talked about this quite a bit, right? You want to maintain both a positive work culture as well as help prevent burnout. We hear about that a lot in different studios when it comes time to crunch. And you are working in live ops, which I want to have a conversation about because I feel like there is pressure to get new content out there, keep things up to date. But what are some strategies you kind of implement to help prevent burnout, to help provide that kind of balanced work life experience?
Yeah, burnout is a really tricky word. I saw an image on LinkedIn once, and it kind of equated it to an iceberg, right? Burnout, most of the time when people talk about it, they talk about hours worked. I find that's actually the least important thing to look at. What's more important is effective decision making, good trade off discussions, prioritization, reducing kind of wasted work or quick pivots, stuff like that, providing context, good communication. Those are the things that I think really, really help prevent burnout. We work in an industry. We work in what I call a passion industry. I go to my kids' school. Every kid there wants to make video games, right? Very few kids say they want to make actuarial software. You know what I mean? So this is something where you get in this industry because you love games. So working extra hours, it happens, right? And what we do is creative, so it's very hard to predict. But what we try and do is really focus on the communication, the decision making, and prioritization and trade off conversations. And we find that that helps quite a bit. The other thing that I think is really important in a live ops service is two things. I think number one is you're always going to be busy. So when you work on a box product, you generally are at, and you can have times where you're at 40% kind of capacity, if you will, of your kind of your working energy, if you will, for a good year or two. And then when you get to the end, you go to like 200% because you're cramming everything and getting everything done. In a live op service, you're always shipping, you're always closing. So you always try and stay at a high level, but you never try and go too high, if you will, from a what I call work energy point of view, right? And whether that's time or effort or stress and all those sorts of things, you try and stay consistent rather than having large peaks and valleys in your work.
So it sounds like kind of like keeping it in cruise control, right? You want to make sure that you have that consistent level of
Yep,
output, not overwork it or underwork it, right?
yep.
Consistency is king here.
Yep. Predictability is really important too, as much as you can. We all have personal lives. If you're working on something and you know you got to ship it, and for whatever reason you've fallen behind, it's much easier to digest if you can plan it ahead of time and it's not a surprise.
Is there a busy season for a live ops studio? Like, for example, Halloween's coming up and then we got Christmas coming up, right? And obviously that's going to be probably big content type of holidays, but you also can plan for this, right? So is there like a busy season to it or it's really kind of planned out well where it's just kind of like,
No, you do your best to plan out the year. I think every game's a little different. When I was working on Call of Duty, we always had, the holiday season was always busy, right? In that game, they always tried to make a big push for the holiday to kind of grab as many sales as possible. On Apex Legends, our big seasons are in February, right? So we generally hit kind of right after the new year is our busy season. On Fortnite, it kind of varied based off of whatever was kind of going on, whether it was the engine or Fortnite. So I wouldn't say there's a busy season, and I think it's different for every product.
it's fascinating. I mean, you've been part of Raven, you've been a part of Epic, you've been a part of Respawn now, and you touched each one of these games, and that's fascinating. But without digging into that, let's talk about the role of a studio director, right? What is the role of a studio director? What's your day to day? What's the skill set that you've learned that you kind of tap into most throughout your day?
Yep. Yeah. In general, my mission is just to set the team up for success. Yeah, I want my team. I want to remove as many roadblocks as possible so they can do their best work. My day to day is a lot of coordinating with my leadership team, with the developers, understanding kind of what challenges they have, helping them work through the challenges, letting them know, and trying to provide some visibility into the future of where things are going so they can make more educated decisions, kind of on a micro level of where to go with the product. The other thing, I think the key skill for a studio director is you need to have range. you need to be able to understand every aspect of game development. I think one of my superpowers, if you will, is I can sit in a room with an artist or an engineer or a designer or a product person or even a finance person, and I can contribute to the conversation. I'm not an expert in any one of those fields, but I have enough knowledge and enough knowledge of the surrounding systems where I can go in there and I can be effective, and I can understand what they're saying, digest that, and then try and translate that back either to them or to someone else in a different department.
So kind of a jack of all trades, but a master of none, for lack of better
Exactly.
words.
Exactly.
When you were younger, right? When you, Ryan, were in elementary school, were you sitting there daydreaming of making actuary software one day, or did you want to be a video game developer? How did this all come to be?
Um, I think I always wanted to make games. I remember when I was a kid, we had a Tandy 1000 in my living room and playing games constantly. Some of my most fun memories are with my best friend Phil. We would literally stay up until 4 in the morning playing Paperboy and Rampage and that Tandy 1000. And I wanted to create that. My mission is to create entertainment. I think the world's a really hard place. I want to make it a little bit brighter, a little bit easier for people. And I just really come back to those moments as a kid, like just bonding with my best friend Phil over video games. It just was special, and we still talk today. He's been my friend since I was 5, and we still talk today.
It's amazing. I love that. I remember those same years growing up. Actually, just recently, I got a Switch and I downloaded Paperboy because you could get it on the Nintendo store. And it is a hard game going
It
back to
is.
it now. I'm just like, oh my God, how did I ever get past the first level in this game?
Yeah.
Um, when you kind of take a look at LiveOps, can you kind of give me in your own words, what is LiveOps? How does a studio approach something? How do you plan?
Yeah, live ops is really interesting. I think the easiest way I can put it, it's building a plane as you're flying, right? It's one of those things where um, in today's market and how games have evolved over the last decade, the players and the consumers, they expect more content. Like you literally cannot provide enough content to the users. They will gobble up whatever you serve in front of them. So really, what it is, it's trying to predict what content is going to be most impactful, which ones your players want the most, and it's a really interesting development because it's not highly predictable. You have plans, but you have to be agile to adjust based off of what your players are telling you. We might put out a piece of content, and it might be a glowing success. So we might pivot that development to do more of that sort of content. We have sometimes where we think, hey, we have a hit on our hands. We have this new content that's really awesome, and it's a complete dud. And all that, not only the qualitative but also the quantitative side is telling us that. So then we might have to change plans a few seasons down the road. So it's one of those things of like you have to lay down tracks, you have to put plans down because you'll never be able to you'll never be able to move fast enough to keep up with it. But you also always have to have this mentality of like, hey, we have to react to the market, right? So it's something where you have to be very, very agile.
You mentioned kind of getting that feedback from your player base, and I think that's fantastic. We've seen some bigger studios now actually much more do a much better job at connecting with their community, and I think that's kind of what LiveOps has to do, is connect with your community. Listen, are there any strategies you implement to kind of hear from the community? Is it built into the game? Do you reach out? Like how are you listening to the community?
Uh, um, it's literally probably dozens of different ways. We do things of we have analytics data on the back end, so we know when our players log in, when they log out, how many players are in the game, what they're playing, all that sort of stuff. So we have that hard quantitative data. We also look through things. We look at Reddit, we look at Twitter, we look at Threads, we look at social media to see what people are saying about it. We put out media, right? So we have community channels on Apex where we look at the comments, we look at how people are reacting to that content. We also don't forget we're part of EA, which is a major Fortune 500 company. There are organizations within EA that do consumer insights and consumer research for us. So we do surveys, we do focus groups, all that sort of stuff. So really, we try and cover kind of every type of feedback and triangulate it together to see where we're seeing commonalities, and then we make our best guesses, kind of how to move forward with that data.
That's awesome to hear. Again, all these players are probably online complaining in Reddit, and it's always nice to hear that, there are people watching, which you would assume that's the case, right? But like
Yep.
hearing it from people, when you take a look at your past, right, you've been a part of a lot of the big studios in Madison, right? You've helped build a lot of these first person shooter games. You're now the studio head, but when you look at your past, is there a specific point of time where everything just kind of said, this is what I want? Like studio head is the job I want. Like, how did you learn that?
Yeah, I have a degree in computer science, so I actually started in the game industry as a tech programmer. I was working on Unreal 3, doing some stuff. I think it was PlayStation 3 at that time. And I remember being really bored because I was working by myself. I was kind of like, I would have a day where I'd be in the office and I wouldn't talk to anyone because I would just have my head down coding. And I hated that. I knew working with people, communicating people was my skill, and I saw an opportunity for the team that I was on to really provide that. So I remember going to my boss at that time and saying I want to be a producer. And I got a really funny look. And he's like, "Wait, why would you want to do that job?" And that was, I think, really that was the beginning journey. I also remember like I I was an okay programmer. I was successful, but I knew I was never going to be great. I would talk to some of my peers and I could just tell right away, right over my head, like, whoa, I'm never going to get to that level. I'm never going to be uber successful. But I remember when I would do things where I would have opportunities to lead teams or coordinate groups or coordinate developers together. I was the best in the room, right? And it was kind of one of those things I was just fortunate enough to recognize, and I really leaned into it. Here's a funny story. My parents, who thankfully paid for my education, it took them good 4 or 5 years until they're like, "Are you still programming? Are you still using that degree?" And I said, "No, trust me, guys. This is it. This is my skill set. And now they finally get it."
That's awesome. I think first of all, that's a lot of people who go through college, right? Is you just need that degree, and then with that degree, you learn what your passion is
Yep.
afterwards, right? You go into the workplace, and I find that fascinating that you started as engineering, basically, and then maybe the stigma is that engineers aren't as social, right? It's hard to kind of get them to communicate, but then you say, hey, I want to be a producer. When you look at yourself growing up in elementary school and high school, right? Were you a social, outgoing person? Were you more, call it the computer nerd, right? That's playing games and doing stuff in class. Like, I'm just
Yeah,
curious, like, kind of what you,
yeah.
what
I'll use some stereotypes here. I was generally the social, outgoing person. I was kind of part of the jocks or the athlete group that gets super stereotypical on you. I was the nerd within my friend group, right? I was the one that liked Star Wars, liked playing video games. Me and my friend Phil were kind of the little bit of like the auxiliary of our friend group when I was a child. And then and then I went to college and I was like, oh, this is, again, I'm being stereotypical, but this is the group that, like, oh yeah, you guys are the true, like, hardcore, like, you guys really are really getting into Star Wars and Star Trek and all that. And I was like, oh, those are my people, right? You know what I mean? Like that was really an eye-opening moment in college.
so then, not counting the EA titles because you can't be biased here, what is the best Star Wars game that was released?
Oh, that's a really good question. Maybe Star Wars Battlefront 2.
The original Battlefront 2.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm gonna go Rogue Squadron. I had
Oh, good
such a
one.
love for Rogue Squadron. Now I heard people are saying if they remake it would be terrible because it's all clunky, but I think there's something special about that game. And maybe it was just having the N64 at the time and just like
Yeah.
hit the spot.
My comrades on the Jedi Survivor team will be remiss if I don't mention them. But I think those are great games. I think those
They are
are fun.
fantastic. I think
Those action adventure games are fun. You can sit down with a bag of Cheetos and just play that game for hours.
I agree. I had a blast with all the Jedi Survivor games. Um, Tell me a little bit about MDev. MDev has been growing year after year, and it's going to be in about 2 weeks, I think, at this point, which is nuts. What is MDev, and why is it important to the community?
Yeah, I kind of describe MDev as the GDC of the Midwest. It's an opportunity for game developers in this region to get together. and network and socialize and chat and share learnings and all that sort of stuff. I think it's mostly about building connections and having conversations, talking shop, talking trials and tribulations. What have you learned? What have I learned? All that sort of stuff. I always look forward to it because I get to meet up with a bunch of my peers that I don't see on a regular basis, and we talk about how things are going. And yeah, I always learn something new. The talks are always great too. It's great to just see developers either that I've worked with in the past or other people that I'm not familiar with, and just learn something new about the game industry.
Awesome. And you'll be a speaker this year, right? Are there any? I think a lot of people at MDev kind of look towards people like you. There's some other high level studio people there. Are there any specific messages you try and get across, or is that too vague of a thing to ask?
You know, I try and um, I try and relate to the audience as much as possible. I think it's one of those things where um, you know, I have a being a studio director, I have a different perspective than most of the people in that room. So I either want to provide an inspiration for like if people have ambitions of how to get to studio director. So I try and provide a path there or some lessons learned that I've learned along the way. So I try and share some of that knowledge. The other thing that I try and do too, the audience there is generally, I think, earlier in their career. So what I try and do is just provide some words of wisdom of like, just because you're not the studio director and you're at the top of the pyramid doesn't mean you can't influence, doesn't mean you can't lead, right? So like try to provide some of those tips and tricks and some of those things that I've learned through my career, either through success or failure, of hey, these are some things you can do and you can apply to your job. So I try and give those general messages. I don't focus too much on the hard skills. It's more the soft skills. How do you work in the game industry? How do you be successful in this industry?
If you had an opportunity to go back to college and choose a different path, would you choose a different path? And what path would that be?
I think right now I would get into AI, but I would still say in technology. I think one of the things that I'm really grateful of is my computer science degree helps me be a better developer. Helps me be a better developer. More specifically, it helps me be a better thinker. Because what you do in computer science, you take really, really large, complex problems and you break them down into individual pieces and sequential pieces, right? So just as we're developing a new character in the game or a new level, you have to do the exact same thing, right? When you come to someone and you say, "Hey, create a new legend," that's a big honking task, right? And what we have to do as leaders and what we have to do as developers is break that down into individual tasks, right? And I think that's something that like I value the training I had in computer science because it forces you to think in that very algorithmic or procedural or step sort of mentality that I literally use it every day.
As a studio director, and I'm naive here, right? I don't know, but I take a look at the different positions that exist in a studio, right? And studio director seems like the top of the iceberg here, right? But where does a studio director go from here? Is it the end? Is it just the beginning, right? I mean, is there a next step?
There's never an end. And I think it really depends on kind of where your interests lie and where you want to go. I think as I've seen studio directors progress, I think there's opportunities, either to grow what you're doing. Right now in Madison, we're a single project studio. We're focused on Apex Legends, right? Maybe there's more projects, right? That's something that a studio director can do. I think studio directors can look to go to the publishing level or the EA level, where you're starting to do more corporate strategy and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of different directions to go. I don't know if I can give you a real concrete answer, but I think what I will say is, the skills you learn as a studio director are really about building and driving teams, and having a good sense of where the game industry is going and how to manage product. I think those skills are highly transferable based off of wherever you want to go in the industry.
If you weren't a studio director, but you still worked in the games industry, what was the role you would want to be doing?
Oh, that's a really good question. I I really get fascinated by I think system design is really interesting. I love getting involved in the system design. So I think if I like I don't know, maybe if I was younger and I chose a different path, that might be something I might get into. I think doing things of like designing leveling systems, progression systems, monetization systems, I think those are really fascinating. I love creating those loops that gets players coming back for more and more and more.
That's fascinating, and I love that. I'm actually talking with another colleague here about doing a more in-depth. They want to talk about the economies and how you balance economies in game, and I think it's similar to what you're saying. And he recently sent me this Call of Duty white paper that was about 25 pages long about matchmaking and the math that goes into matchmaking, and it's fascinating. Like you just think, hey, I'm matchmaking, and then you have games like X Defiant that comes out that gets rid of skills-based matchmaking, and you see what happens with that, and it's a whole nother career basically balancing these matchmaking things, seeing this type of data. And I assume live ops isn't that far because you're looking at player retention rates, looking at engagement rates, and you're looking at in-game purchases, right? And like that must be so much data to look at. So I assume there's like a large data science or some sort of team there to help kind of build this stuff out. Is that right?
Yep. There's definitely data scientists and analysts, economists, all that sort of stuff that really helps. What they do a terrific job at is they take all that really complex data and that, to be frank, some of the mathematics that most people don't understand, and they distill it down to kind of things that people can understand and that we can make decisions against. It's really fascinating. Matchmaking is one of those it's one of those topics, borderline religious debates. Like there is a million ways to do it. What works for one game doesn't necessarily work for the other game. I think it's one of those things that like you have to look at your data, you have to test it, you have to use A/B testing over and over and over again to do it successfully.
Yeah, it's a whole nother world. I'm excited to kind of go down because I'm a data guy. I love numbers, and it seems like yeah, that's a whole bunch of things going on there. When it comes to Respawn, you have multiple studios, which we discussed. How do you keep communication with the other offices? Is it something that's as urgent because you're working on different projects? Do you have tools that you use?
Oh, we're actually working. Apex is distributed, right? So we have a team in Madison, we have a team in Los Angeles, and we have a team in Vancouver. And we have a whole host of people that are remote. So it's a highly distributed team. So there's leadership spread across primarily North America. But we do regular syncs. Every Tuesday we meet with the franchise leadership team. We do director meetings on a regular basis. It's really a lot of communication via Zoom, a lot of communication via Slack, and documenting in Confluence is probably primarily how we stay connected.
I feel like that's most of the questions I have for you today, Ryan, and I love this conversation. It's fascinating. But is there anything I should be asking that I'm not asking?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I think is important is building culture. I think it's one of those things where you get on these calls. We work in an incredibly hard industry, right? Creating fun is not easy to do. And I think what I find is creating a strong culture where you can have candid conversations. You can iterate quickly. People aren't afraid to give feedback. The notion that good ideas come from anywhere, I think that's really important to have within a studio. It's something that we really focus on here at Respawn. It's just really creating a culture of communication and candor and feedback that I think is really, really important to kind of get something out. I think games today are so large. There are literally hundreds of people working on Apex Legends and Fortnite and Call of Duty. You cannot do anything yourself, so you have to come together as a group. And having strong culture that allows you to come together as a group and do things together, I think is really critical and important.
I recently I spoke with the game director of Marvel Rivals. His name's Thad Sasser, and he started talking about finding the fun in games, which is something I thought was a fascinating statement. And you know, to people, it probably sounds so obvious. We'll just make something exciting and cool, and then like, no, it doesn't work like that. But how does that process work? Do you guys literally sit in a room and you kind of just spitball ideas? Is it just communication? Like, is it just throwing a bunch of crap against the wall, right, and seeing what sticks?
Yep. Yeah, it starts with what do we want to accomplish? What's our objective, right? Do we want the users to play with more legends? Do we want the users to use a certain gun? Do we feel our users are getting bored with the same formula? Do we want to shake up the formula a little bit, or the meta? So really, it starts there with just what do we want to achieve, and then we do, oftentimes we do get in a room and we just whiteboard. You just brainstorm. You just throw out ideas, and you start to kind of whittle through that. Once you have an idea, it's really about flushing that idea and trying to think of every detail you can. And we do our best to try and think of all the details on paper before we start coding. But one thing you learn very quickly in the game industry, you cannot design anything on paper, right? You can only get so far. So you kind of get to a point where you kind of have a plan and everyone believes in it, and you can kind of squint and you're like, okay, I think this is going to be successful, right? And then it's really about getting a prototype and getting your hands on the sticks, as we say, or hands on your controller, and playing it, right? And then you start to kind of like really fine tune it and get it to go. One of the indicators that I have for whether a feature or a product is going to be successful is how loud is the playtest pit? Is the playtest pit loud? Are people having fun? Are people staying longer than we've allocated for playtesting? Usually we playtest for about an hour a day on average. Are people staying an hour and a half, 2 hours to play the game? If you have that, you're sitting on gold. I remember when I was working on Warzone, I got a call from an executive, and he just asked me, "Hey, how's it coming? How's it going?" And I said, "Well, I've never seen the playtest pit louder." And I said, we're on something. We're on the right path. And it's this, it's kind of weird saying to an executive, our playtest pit is loud. Trust me, it's great. But it's been proven over and over again that, if we love it, our fans are probably going to love it, because we're all gamers too.
With what you said earlier, right, where you kind of take these tests and you have to look at it, right? Like, is there ever a risk going through your head, like you don't want to shake the boat too much? For years, PUBG was king, Fortnite came in, was king, and it didn't seem like anyone else can create a battle royale game. Then Apex came in and put their foot down and made a statement. And then you have games that come out like Concord that just don't hit the mark right at launch, right? Like, is there ever a risk, like we can't take too much risk here? Or do you think the player base, now that it's stabilized, for lack of better words, is willing to take a little bit of a chance?
Um, I don't know. What I can tell you is you have to be fast. You always have to be evolving, right? How much risk you're willing to take, I think there's a lot of variables there. As an independent, I would argue you need to take more risk because you need to stick out more. As a publicly traded company, your risk is valued against stock price and revenue data and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's really, really variable, and I think it's very situational of how much risk you're willing to take on to shake up the formula. But I will say, the industry moves so fast, you don't want to be left behind, so you always have to be looking. You have to have some amount of risk. You have to stick your neck out sometimes and try something new and something different. One of the beauties of LiveOps is you can always pull it back. You can change it. It's not like games 15 years ago where you print something on a disc and that's what it was, and it's like, oh shoot, we screwed up level 4. That doesn't. Well, you screw up level 4. Well, you change it. You change it in LiveOps, right? Those are things you can do now. So I think that does mitigate some of the risk, and it does allow us to kind of stretch a little bit further. But in general, just always be moving, always be looking for how do you improve.
What game are you playing right now?
What am I playing right now? I'm actually playing. I have small children, so my console gaming time is severely cut down. So I'm playing a lot of mobile games right now. I'm a big fan of Supercell. I'm playing Squad Busters right now quite a bit because I get these little like 5 minute increments between kind of hanging out with my children. My kids are just getting in the gaming, so I'm playing games like Fall Guys, which is super fun to play as a family. I play Fortnite with them. We love just doing silly things in those levels. And then also too, I've just recently got in the race sim, so I'm a big fan of Forza Motorsport.
Awesome. All great games. I've been, my 6-year-old, we've been playing Lego Marvel Superheroes. He's been
Awesome.
loving that game.
Yes.
And I just did, again, with Josh from Pyramid Lake Games. They're making a game, The Floor is What? And that looks like it could be a fun family game for everyone to kind of get together. It reminds me of a Fusion Frenzy, if you remember that from
Yep.
days
Yep.
past.
Yep. Definitely.
There was something that I or my audience wanted to read or learn and consume, is there a piece of content that you've looked over time and said this was a very helpful thing to kind of help me get to where I am?
That's a good question. I don't think it's anything game related. I listen to a Prof G and Pivot podcast, which is really about economies and markets and all that sort of stuff. I try and really diversify what I look at and what I read. I think Simon Sinek is a leadership genius. It just digests anything he puts out there. So try and look for those sorts of things. I think my path has always been leadership, so I really have kind of gravitated to that. But the other thing that I'll say is like expose yourself to how other industries are working, right? I'm super fascinated by AI right now and how the AI market is kind of growing and how do you productize something like AI? I think there's lessons learned there. When I look at what Netflix is doing with gaming, is there something we can learn there on the EA side or the console side? I think trying to like really broaden what you look at rather than kind of stay in your lane. Because I think if you stay in your lane, you're going to get a lot of copy and repeat. I think it's important that you kind of expand your vision to other industries and other markets that you might be able to pull bits and pieces from and add it to what you're working on.
Yeah, we saw a video from EA actually not that a couple of weeks ago, I think, where it had a text to game concept that they were building out, and they were kind of showing a live on the fly of kind of saying, build this, build that, give us these types of guns. And it was fascinating. And, I always think the human element will be necessary in building a game. You need that personal touch, right? But seeing how more people can start to kind of create their visions with an easier starting platform, I think is a fantastic concept. And it'll be very interesting to see where AI can take the industry. And again, I'm a big proponent that humans will always need to be in the loop
Yep,
to build
yep,
this stuff
yep.
out. But
Agree.
I think it's a fascinating way for people like myself who don't know how to code to like say, hey, I want to try this.
Yeah, I'm hopeful and optimistic AI does two things. I think number one, hopefully it allows us to create bigger games and better games. I think what EA did with college football in doing all the stadiums and all that sort of stuff and using AI to help build out those stadiums, I think that's a really good example. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg of how games can become bigger, right? While keeping costs relatively effective. I think the other thing that I'm hoping to do is actually on the other scale, it allows really small teams to do really creative, really high end things. I think when you see small scale games right now, you can tell it's a small scale game. And I think what AI will do is it'll help blur that edge, if you will, of like, oh, well, maybe it's a team of 12 people, but you're creating a full AAA title. Maybe the tools will get to that level. I think when I look down the road, those are the things I'm really excited about.
I agree, and that's actually one of the main reasons I'm excited about MDev. I think there's a lot of studios in the Midwest that are using Unreal, and as well as a lot of the tools built into Unreal to help them build things quickly,
Yep,
scale quickly with a minimal team. And I think those are kind of that's the beauty of the industry and where we're going, right? It's becoming
yep,
easier for creators to create and allowing more people to build out bigger projects.
yep. Just relating it to other industries. Look at movies, TV, and film. Right? The iPhone is amazing right now. Right? You can literally shoot a movie on an iPhone right now. That just think about how that kind of just it puts creation in so many people's hands that like you no longer need a $10,000 red camera to create a film. That's incredible to me. Like just digest that for a second.
It's going to be a fantastic future, and I'm excited to see what comes. But Ryan, I'm going to let you continue here with your Friday. I appreciate everything you've spoken about. I think you have one of the coolest jobs in the world. You got to build a studio, which is awesome. You got to put your visions into working reality, which is awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to meet you at MDev and see you at MDev. But before we go, is there anything you want to talk about or share with the audience?
No, just thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure being here, and go play some Apex Legends.
Go play some Apex Legends. We will have we'll have some URLs to Respawn site, to information about Ryan on our Player Engage website. He will be a speaker at MDev on November 8th, so check it out. And again, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks a lot, Greg.